On warm, sunny days, their gentle buzzing fills the air. You might barely notice them as they fly from flower to flower. But do you know how important honeybees are to you? Honeybees make it possible for us to grow many of the plants we depend on for food. There are about 20,000 different species of bees in the world, and almost all of them make honey. But only one, the honeybee, makes enough honey for people to gather and use. When you see bees on flowers, they are gathering pollen to eat and nectar from which they make honey. The gathering bees eat very little of what they find. They take most of it back to the beehive, where it will be used by the whole bee colony that lives there. Beekeepers give their bees ready-made hives like these, and the bees build their colonies inside. Each of these wooden hives houses one colony where up to 80,000 bees can live. Here, there are 5 separate hives. Honeybees might travel as far as 50 miles or about 80 kilometers in a single day as they search for flowers. But most of their time is spent inside the beehive in pitch-black darkness. We have to shine lights into parts of this beehive so we can see what goes on inside. Bees are insects, and like all adult insects, they have 6 legs. They also have 4 wings. Their bodies are divided into 3 sections: the head, the thorax or middle section, and the abdomen. The head has 2 antennae or feelers and 2 large compound eyes. All 4 wings and 6 legs are connected to the bee's thorax. The bees' legs have special features that help them perform the many jobs they do. The bee's abdomen contains its main digestive organs, reproductive organs, and its stinger. There are 3 different kinds or castes of honeybees in a hive, and they all have different jobs to do. The first caste, the queen bee, is the mother of every bee in her hive. The second caste, worker bees, take care of the queen and do many tasks that build or care for the hive. Worker bees are female bees that don't mate or lay eggs. Every honeybee you see on a flower and almost every bee in the hive is a female worker bee. Male bees, called drones, are the third caste. They have larger eyes and larger abdomens. They don't have stingers. Their only job is to mate with the queen bee. The queen bee feels with her antennas to find an empty honeycomb cell to lay an egg in. The egg is the first stage in the bee's 4-stage life cycle. The other 3 stages are larva, pupa, and adult. This 4-stage life cycle is known as complete metamorphosis. As the queen lays eggs, she fertilizes most of them with sperm she has stored in her body. A queen bee mates only once during a mating flight that takes place early in her life. After that, she will be able to fertilize eggs for the rest of her life. Her only job is to lay eggs for the colony. She will lay about 1,500 eggs each day in the spring, summer, and fall. Fertilized eggs will develop into female worker bees. Unfertilized eggs will develop into male drone bees. 3 days after the queen lays an egg, a tiny worm-like larva will hatch from it. Before it hatches, worker bees put food near the egg so the new larva will have something to eat. The larva is the second stage of the bee's life cycle. It starts out about as big as the head of a pin, but it grows very quickly. For the first 3 days after the larvae hatch, the workers feed them a special food called royal jelly. It's rich in protein and vitamins and is made by glands on the young worker bees' heads. After 3 days, the growing larvae are fed a mixture of honey and pollen called bee bread. The larvae eat all day and all night long. After 5 days, they are still worm-like, but are almost the size of a full-grown adult bee. The larvae are fed by young worker bees that are less than 2 weeks old. These workers do many chores around the beehive, and what they do depends on how old they are. For the first few days of adulthood, worker bees have the job of cleaning up the hive. Then they become nurse bees and feed and tend the eggs and growing larvae. The temperature inside the beehive must stay the same all the time, at 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees centigrade. Some workers have the job of fanning their wings to make air move through the hive. This cools the air and keeps the hive from getting too hot. When the larvae are 5 or 6 days old, the workers no longer feed them. Now the workers use flakes of beeswax to cover the opening and seal each larva into its honeycomb cell. The larva inside stretches out and spins a sort of silken cocoon inside its cell. The larva then sheds its skin and becomes a pupa. This is the third stage in the bee's 4-stage life cycle. The pupa is a stage many insects go through as they transform from worm-like larvae into adult insects. Even though they are almost colorless, you can see that these pupae are developing into adult bees. Their heads are on the left side of the screen near the tops of their cells. After about 16 days as a pupa, the bee will enter the 4th stage of its life cycle. It will bite a hole in its cell and pull its way out, now a fully grown adult bee. Female worker bees develop from egg to adult in 21 days. Male drone bees, like this one, develop in 24 days. The drones are so much larger than the workers, they have to drag themselves out of their cells. Their only job in life will be to mate with a queen. In autumn, when food for the hive becomes hard to find, the worker bees drive the drones out of the hive to die. Drones have no stingers and cannot defend themselves. When worker bees are 10 to 12 days old, they stop feeding the larvae and begin to build honeycomb. Honeycomb is made of beeswax, another valuable bee product that people have harvested and used for thousands of years. Beeswax has been used in the manufacture of candles, furniture and floor waxes, ointments, paints, inks, and sculptures. Bees use their wax for building the walls and the storage and birth chambers in their hive. Individual chambers or cells are all shaped like this. They are 6-sided spaces, or hexagons. Beeswax is formed in tiny glands in the worker bees' abdomens. Flakes of wax are produced one at a time. With her feet, a worker brings the flakes of wax up to her mouth so she can chew them and make them easier to mold and shape. Worker bees produce wax and build honeycomb all year except in the winter. Worker bees must eat about 10 ounces of honey for every ounce of wax they produce. In the winter, the bees eat very little honey because they are trying to make it last until spring. This is how a bee uses her mouth parts to work the wax. Inside walls and chambers are made using pure beeswax, but bees sometimes mix their wax with resin or soil to form a harder substance for sealing holes or breaks in the hive's outside walls. Honeybees have many ways of communicating with each other. They give and receive messages by touching each other, by exchanging food and other substances, and by dancing to show the location of food sources. Their close communication helps them act cooperatively to accomplish their work, from the simplest jobs to the most complex. The hive's honeycomb system of attached hexagons creates no wasted space and is very strong. But it can be destroyed by melting if the temperature in the hive rises too high. The bees keep the hive cool by bringing in water and by flapping their wings to circulate the air. Worker bees that hatch during the summer season live for about 6 weeks. During their first 2 or 3 weeks of life, all their jobs are inside the hive. When they are about 17 days old, they take on guard duty at the hive's entrance. Then, at about 3 weeks of age, they begin to work outside the hive. They gather nectar and pollen from flowering plants. This is the work that makes bees so important to us. Most fruits and vegetables need bees or other insects to carry their pollen from flower to flower in order for them to produce fruits and seeds. This process is called pollination. Many insects, some birds, and other animals also pollinate flowers, but none of them do as much as the honeybee. Without honeybees, we would not be able to grow enough food for all the people and animals on Earth. As bees collect pollen from flowers, they store it in the pollen baskets on their hind legs. When the baskets are full, they fly back to the hive. Bees collect nectar by sucking it through their tube-like tongues, which they also use for collecting water. They drink a little water themselves, but they bring most of it back to the hive, where it's used to control the temperature and to keep the nursery cells moist. As gathering bees return to the hive, they must be identified by the guard bees at the entrance. They must also empty their pollen baskets. All the pollen goes into the hive storage area. The nectar they gather is rich in carbohydrates, but like all animals, bees must also eat protein to survive. They get their protein from the pollen, which is also rich in many other nutrients. Pollen is so important to the colony that a special alert goes out whenever the hive's pollen supplies are getting low. Pollen is taken to storage chambers where young worker bees will make sure it is stored properly. Pollen gathered in the fall along with the stored honey must feed the colony throughout the winter. Many honeycomb chambers are used only for the storage of pollen. Other chambers are used only for the storage of honey that will be eaten throughout the winter. Here's how the bees make honey. After gathering nectar from flowers in the fields, the bees transfer that nectar to other worker bees in the hive. The nectar is passed from bee to bee, and each bee mixes enzymes from its glands with the nectar. Each bee also removes some of the water from the nectar, making it thicker. This is how bees begin to turn flower nectar into honey. Then, the partially ripe honey is placed into storage chambers where more water will evaporate from it, and it will become even thicker. Worker bees continue to move the honey from chamber to chamber, adding more enzymes to the honey every time they move it. Other bees nearby flap their wings very fast. The breeze they create carries moist air out of the hive and helps the water in the honey evaporate faster. The honey is ready when it becomes thick and ripe. At that point, it is between 17 and 20% water and much thicker than the nectar from which it was made. The bees seal the chambers of ripe honey with a thin cover of wax. This keeps the honey from evaporating anymore. All of the summer's hard work will provide the hive with enough stored honey and pollen for the queen and about 1/4 of the workers to survive through the winter. Then, the next spring, the queen will again begin laying eggs, and the hive's activities will start all over again.